Jake Morrison was having what he considered a perfectly reasonable Tuesday morning when his entire life got derailed by a 6-foot-tall purple slug wearing a suit. "Greetings, human Jake Morrison," the slug announced, somehow managing to sound both pompous and wet at the same time. "I am Administrative Coordinator Flibbert of the Galactic Wildlife Preserve Authority, and I bring you the most tremendous honor." Jake looked up from his coffee and his morning routine of pretending to read incident reports. "Let me guess. Someone needs a human to do something incredibly stupid and potentially fatal, and somehow my name came up?" "Oh, no, no, no," Flibbert said, his eye stalks waggling with enthusiasm. "This is far more prestigious. You have been selected for the sacred duty of Juvenile Protection Services." "Come again?" "You are to guard the cubs." Jake set down his coffee very carefully. In his 3 years working galactic security, he'd learned that when aliens got excited about giving humans jobs, it usually meant one of two things. Either the job was so dangerous that no sane species would take it, or it was so boring that everyone else had fallen asleep trying to do it. "And by cubs, you mean the most precious offspring of 3 endangered species," Flibbert practically vibrated with joy. "The preserve houses baby saber-rexes, void chompers, and quantum spikelings. They require constant supervision and protection." "Uh-huh. And you want me because humans have legendary protective instincts. Your species is famous throughout the galaxy for your ability to guard the young." Flibbert's voice dropped to what he probably thought was a whisper, but sounded more like a broken garbage disposal. "Between you and me, human Jake Morrison, the previous 17 guards from other species have all resigned." "Resigned?" "Well, 12 resigned. 3 had nervous breakdowns, 1 joined a monastery, and 1 just started screaming and hasn't stopped yet. We think he's saying why, but it's hard to tell." Jake rubbed his temples. "And you think sending a human will fix this problem? How exactly?" "Because you are the species that invented the concept of Mama Bear Fury, the one that produces individuals willing to fight off entire armies to protect children that are not even genetically related to you. Surely 3 small cubs will be no challenge for the mighty human protective drive." "3 small cubs of what species again?" "Oh, completely harmless. Well, mostly harmless, somewhat harmless. They're very cute." Jake had been in enough alien conversations to know that when someone started hedging their adjectives, it was time to start asking better questions. But he also knew that his current job consisted mainly of standing around looking intimidating while rich aliens argued about parking spots at the space mall. "What's the pay?" "Triple your current salary, full medical coverage, and we'll throw in hazard pay." "Hazard pay for babysitting?" "Standard precautionary measure, purely ceremonial. The cubs are angels." Jake looked at his coffee again. Then he looked at the stack of incident reports that definitely weren't going to read themselves. Then he looked at Flibbert, who was somehow managing to sweat despite being a slug. "When do I start?" "Immediately. The transport leaves in 1 hour." And that was how Jake Morrison, former Marine, current Space Mall security guard, and full-time smartass, became the galaxy's most overqualified babysitter. As Flibbert oozed away, muttering something about updating insurance policies, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just volunteered for something that was going to make his Marine Corps days look like a relaxing vacation. He was absolutely right. The Galactic Wildlife Preserve looked exactly like what Jake had expected, a cross between a zoo, a daycare center, and a maximum security prison, which, given what he was about to meet, was probably appropriate. "Welcome to Sanctuary 7, chirped Nerissa, the preserve director, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a nervous breakdown. Her forearms were constantly moving, checking clipboards, adjusting her glasses, and wringing themselves in what Jake was beginning to recognize as perpetual anxiety. "I'm so excited to meet you. Well, excited and terrified. Mostly terrified. Did Flibbert mention the liability waivers?" "Eat it not." "Oh, dear. Well, there are 17 of them. Death by crushing, death by incineration, death by dimensional displacement, death by adorable mauling." She trailed off, noticing Jake's expression. "But I'm sure you'll be fine. Humans are supposed to be very durable, right? That's what the insurance company hopes, anyway." They walked through a series of increasingly reinforced doors, each one making Jake question his life choices a little more. Finally, they reached a large, park-like enclosure that looked deceptively peaceful. "Cubs!" Nerissa called out in a voice that somehow managed to be both cheerful and terrified. "Come meet your new guardian." The first thing that bounded out of the artificial forest was about the size of a golden retriever. If golden retrievers had metallic silver fur, retractable claws the length of kitchen knives, and enough teeth to stock a dental supply warehouse. "This is Razor Claw," Nerissa announced. "He's a baby saber-ek." Razor Claw puffed out his tiny chest and let out what was clearly meant to be a fearsome roar but came out more like a squeaky toy having an existential crisis. "I am mighty, I am fierce, I am—" Why is the human not running away in terror? Jake crouched down to the cub's eye level. "Because you sound like a mouse with anger management issues, buddy." The second arrival was sleek and black, with bioluminescent spots and what appeared to be a mouth that opened in directions Jake was pretty sure violated several laws of physics. "And this is Chompers, our baby void chomper," Nerissa continued, her voice getting higher with each introduction. "He's going through a growth phase where he eats approximately everything." Chompers immediately tried to take a bite out of Jake's boot. When his teeth failed to penetrate the reinforced leather, he looked confused and slightly offended. "This food is broken," he announced in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm not food, kid." "Everything is food if you're creative enough," Chompers replied with the kind of philosophical certainty that only small children and apex predators possessed. The third cub materialized out of what Jake had thought was empty air, which was unsettling enough without the fact that he appeared to be made of living crystal and had more eyes than strictly necessary. "Behold the human guardian unit," the crystal cub announced in a voice like wind chimes in a tornado. "I am Spike, offspring of the quantum spikeling dynasty. I have calculated a 73% probability that you will expire within the first week of your assignment." "Cheerful?" Jake muttered. "I do not understand this human concept of cheerful," Spike continued, somehow managing to look thoughtful despite having a face made of geometric crystal formations. "However, I am curious about your species' apparent disregard for statistical probability. Most sentient beings would flee upon learning of such odds." "Most sentient beings haven't spent 2 tours dodging actual bullets," Jake replied. "You 3 are definitely weird, but at least you're not trying to blow me up." "Yet," Chompers added helpfully. "We could arrange that," Razorclaw squeaked, trying to look menacing and mostly succeeding in looking like an angry kitten. Nerissa's nervous laughter reached a pitch that probably violated several noise ordinances. "They're just testing you. It's perfectly normal behavior. The last guard only cried for the first 6 hours." Jake looked around the enclosure, taking in the reinforced walls, the emergency exits, and what appeared to be blast shields disguised as playground equipment. Then he looked back at the 3 cubs, who were watching him with the intense focus of tiny predators sizing up their prey. "All right," he said finally. "Ground rules. I'm Jake. I'm here to keep you 3 alive and entertained. In return, you don't eat me, claw me, or phase me into another dimension. Deal?" The 3 cubs exchanged glances that somehow managed to be both adorable and ominous. "We accept your terms," Spike announced formally. "However, I should inform you that the previous guard's contracts contain similar clauses, and yet here I am and they're not," Jake interrupted. "Funny how that works." For the first time since he'd arrived, Nerissa looked hopeful. "You know, you might actually last longer than the others. The record is currently held by Guard Captain Blixtor, who made it almost 4 days before he started speaking in tongues." Jake was beginning to understand why the hazard pay was so generous. Jake had been on the job for exactly 6 hours and was starting to think he might actually survive this assignment when the universe decided to prove him wrong. The emergency alarm started blaring, with the kind of sound that suggested something had gone catastrophically wrong somewhere important. Nerissa's forearms went into overdrive, frantically checking multiple communication devices, while her eyes darted around like pinballs in a hurricane. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she chanted, which Jake was learning was her default response to anything more exciting than feeding time. "What's the situation?" Jake asked, while simultaneously grabbing Chompers, who had decided the alarm was a dinner bell and was trying to eat the speaker system. "Code Omega 7, Nerissa shrieked. "The Void Hunters have escaped containment." Jake paused in the middle of prying Chompers away from what was definitely not food. "Come again?" "The Void Hunters. They broke out of the maximum security facility on Station Prime. They're loose in the sector." Spike's crystalline head swiveled toward them with a sound like breaking glass. "Fascinating. The probability of Void Hunter escape from Station Prime was calculated at 0.003%. This is a statistically improbable event. Kid, when something has void in its name and it's described as a hunter, I'm pretty sure statistics go out the window," Jake replied. What exactly are void hunters? Razorclaw asked, for once dropping his fierce act and sounding like the concerned cub he actually was. Nerissa made a sound like a deflating balloon. They're only the most feared predator species in known space. They hunt in packs, they can track prey across multiple star systems, and they consider everything that breathes to be either food or sport. Usually both, Spike added helpfully. They are known for their practice of torturing prey for entertainment before consumption. Thanks for that, kid. Really brightening the mood. The communication device in Nerissa's upper right hand crackled to life. This is Transport 7 requesting immediate evacuation clearance. We're coming in hot with all available personnel. Jake looked around the preserve. All personnel? Well, everyone except you and the cubs, obviously, Nerissa said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. The cubs can't be moved. Their immune systems are too delicate during development, and someone has to stay with them. And that someone is me? Well, you are the guardian. A familiar, wet, slithering sound announced Flibbert's arrival before they saw him. The administrative coordinator oozed into the compound at maximum slug speed, which was considerably less impressive than it sounded. Human Jake Morrison, he gasped, leaving a trail of bureaucratic slime behind him. Wonderful news. We're evacuating everyone to safety. The transport leaves in 20 minutes. Great, Jake said. Where are the cube carriers? Flibbert's eye stalks went in different directions, which Jake was learning meant the alien was about to deliver bad news. Ah, yes, about that. The cubs cannot be relocated during their developmental phase. Something about their molecular structure destabilizing if they're removed from their home environment. So we're leaving them? Oh, goodness, no. That would be against 17 different galactic protection treaties. No. Someone has to stay with them. Flibbert paused, seeming to realize what he was saying. Someone brave and capable, and preferably with excellent life insurance. Jake looked at the three cubs, who were watching this exchange with the focused attention of small creatures who understood that their lives were being discussed. Then he looked at Nerissa, who was practically vibrating with panic. Then he looked at Flibbert, who was trying very hard not to make eye contact. You're telling me that the most dangerous predators in the galaxy are heading this way, everyone is evacuating, and you want me to stay here with 3 baby alien death machines? When you put it like that, it does sound rather unreasonable, Flibbert admitted. How long until the Void Hunters get here? Spike's eyes flickered as he accessed some internal database. Based on their last known trajectory and typical hunting patterns, approximately 4 hours and 37 minutes. And how long for backup to arrive? Assuming they can organize a military response and travel time. Spike paused. Approximately 12 hours. Nerissa made a sound like a tea kettle having a breakdown. You have to come with us. No one expects you to fight Void Hunters. That's what militaries are for. Jake looked around the preserve again. It was a nice place, all things considered. Lots of hiding spots, plenty of equipment, and surprisingly good structural integrity. Plus, the cubs were kind of growing on him, even if Chompers had tried to eat his lunch and Razorclaw kept challenging him to combat. No, he said finally, I think we'll stay. The silence that followed was the kind of complete quiet that suggested everyone present was questioning either Jake's sanity or their own hearing. I'm sorry, Flibbert said slowly. Did you just volunteer to fight the most feared predators in the galaxy, alone? To protect 3 cubs that aren't even your species? Jake shrugged and started walking toward what looked like a supply closet. Someone's got to do it. Besides, how dangerous can they really be? The sound of Nerissa fainting echoed across the compound, followed immediately by Flibbert's horrified whisper. He doesn't know. Oh, stars, he actually doesn't know! But Jake was already mentally cataloging the compound's resources and thinking about lunch. After all, if he was going to have visitors in 4.5 hours, he should probably tidy up first. 20 minutes after the evacuation transport disappeared into hyperspace, Jake stood in the center of the preserve with a steaming cup of coffee and a maintenance manual, watching 3 alien cubs attempt to help with his preparations. I still don't understand why you stayed, Spike said, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that probably meant he was thinking hard. The statistical probability of survival against Void Hunters is approximately… Kid, if I wanted to hear about statistics, I'd have stayed in school. Jake interrupted, flipping through a schematic of the preserve's layout. Right now I need to know if this place has any defensive systems worth mentioning. Well, there's the emergency containment field, Razorclaw offered, puffing out his chest in a way that suggested he was trying to be helpful rather than fierce. It's designed to keep us inside, but maybe it could keep other things out? Good thinking. What else? Chompers emerged from what had been a decorative water feature, with his head covered in algae and something that might have been a fish. The food dispensers can launch nutrition pellets at high velocity. I tested this hypothesis extensively. Of course you did. Jake made a note about potential projectile weapons. Spike, you mentioned something about the playground equipment being blast-resistant? Affirmative. All recreational structures are rated for impact resistance up to Class 7 explosions. The designers assumed we might be energetic in our play. Jake looked at the playground equipment with new eyes. What he'd taken for jungle gyms were actually reinforced metal frameworks. The slides were made of some kind of composite material that could probably stop small arms fire. And the sandbox was clearly designed to contain more than just sand. All right then, Jake cracked his knuckles. Time to get creative. The next 3 hours turned into the galaxy's most unconventional home improvement project. Jake started with the entrance, using the emergency containment field generators to create a bottleneck. But instead of a straight barrier, he angled them to create a funnel that would force any attackers into a kill zone in front of the main playground structure. Human Jake? Razorclaw asked, watching Jake rewire a food dispenser to launch its contents at considerably higher than manufacturer recommended velocities. Why are you smiling like that? Because I just realized these nutrition pellets are basically high-protein rocks, and I'm about to turn your lunch into artillery. Chompers perked up immediately. Can I help? I have extensive experience with food destruction. Sure, kid. See if you can figure out how to make these things fire in sequence rather than all at once. While Chompers enthusiastically disassembled feeding equipment, Jake moved on to the climbing structure. The reinforced metal framework was perfect for his purposes, with a few modifications. He rerouted the lighting system to create strobing patterns that would disorient predators, adapted to the void of space. Then he connected the jungle gym's motion sensors to the newly weaponized food dispensers. Spike, I need you to calculate firing angles, Jake called out as he balanced on top of the slide, installing what had been emergency floodlights as makeshift spotlights. If something comes through that entrance, where do I need these dispensers pointed to hit it? Spike's eyes flickered through several colors as he processed. Based on standard Void Hunter morphology and movement patterns, optimal targeting solutions would be... He rattled off a series of coordinates that Jake translated into practical mounting positions. You know, Razorclaw said, watching Jake turn the sandbox into what was clearly a trap involving sand, emergency foam, and several containers of what the manual described as industrial adhesive. For someone who doesn't know about Void Hunters, you seem to be preparing for them quite effectively. Kid, I don't need to know what they are to know what they want, Jake replied, testing the trigger mechanism he'd rigged to dump the entire contents of the sandbox on anything large enough to step in it. They're predators, right? That means they're probably fast, probably smart, and definitely overconfident. How do you know they're overconfident? Spike asked. Because they're coming here. Jake wiped his hands on his shirt and looked around at his handiwork. They broke out of maximum security, they're being hunted by the entire galactic fleet, and instead of running for the outer rim, they decided to make a detour to attack a wildlife preserve. That's not tactics, that's ego. The cubs exchanged glances. There was something in Jake's voice that hadn't been there before. A cold, calculating edge that suggested the easygoing security guard was just one face of a more complex individual. Besides, Jake continued, his tone returning to its usual casual register, I've got advantages they don't know about. Such as... Nerissa's voice crackled over the communication system. Apparently she was monitoring them from the evacuation ship. Jake looked at the three cubs, who were covered in industrial adhesive, nutrition pellet dust, and various bits of repurposed playground equipment. Razorclaw was proudly wearing what had been a safety helmet but now served as armor plating. Chompers had somehow gotten his head stuck in a feeding tube and seemed to consider this an improvement. Spike was methodically calculating the trajectory of every piece of debris in the compound, with the intense focus of a tiny tactical computer. I've got 3 junior engineers who think this is the best game they've ever played, Jake said, grinning as Chompers finally extracted himself from the feeding tube with a sound like a cork popping. And about 2 hours of Marine Corps engineering training that your Void Hunters have definitely never encountered before. Jake, Nerissa's voice was small and worried. The sensor array shows them entering the system. They'll be there in 30 minutes. Jake looked around the preserve one more time. Every surface had been turned into either a weapon, a trap, or cover. The lighting system would strobe in patterns designed to cause vertigo in space-adapted eyes. The food dispensers were loaded and aimed. The sandbox trap was primed, and the cubs were armed with improvised protective gear and unlimited enthusiasm. Perfect, Jake said, settling into what had been a bench but was now a command post overlooking his improvised fortress. Right on time. Chompers, you remember what happens when something big comes through that entrance, right? I activate the emergency foam system and then hide behind the blast barrier. And Razorclaw? I trigger the sandbox trap and then retreat to position 2. And Spike? I coordinate targeting data and provide tactical analysis from the reinforced observation post. Jake nodded approvingly. And if things go really wrong? We hide in the emergency bunker and let you handle it, all 3 cubs chorused. Good. Now, who wants snacks? We've got about 20 minutes before the galaxy's most feared predators show up. And I don't know about you guys, but I fight better on a full stomach. As Jake distributed what appeared to be military rations from his personal supplies, the cubs began to understand that their human guardian wasn't just refusing to abandon them. He was looking forward to the fight. Human Jake? Razorclaw asked quietly. Yeah, buddy. Are we going to win? Jake looked out at the sensor readings showing multiple fast-moving objects approaching their location, then back at 3 small alien cubs who were trusting him with their lives. Kid, he said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. Those poor bastards have no idea what they're walking into. The Void Hunters arrived exactly 17 minutes later, which Jake had to admit showed impressive tactical precision. What they lacked, however, was any understanding of human psychological warfare. Sensor contact, Spike announced from his crystalline observation post, his multiple eyes tracking the incoming signatures. 3 vessels, Hunter-class configuration, approaching from Vector 77 Mark IV. Jake watched through the reinforced windows as sleek, predatory ships descended through the atmosphere like falling shadows. They were beautiful in the way that apex predators were beautiful, all smooth lines and implied violence. Remember the plan, Jake called to the cubs, who had taken their positions with a kind of enthusiasm that suggested they thought this was the galaxy's most dangerous game of hide-and-seek. Nobody moves until I give the signal. The ships landed with barely a whisper, which was probably meant to be intimidating but mostly just reminded Jake of every horror movie he'd ever seen. 3 hatches opened simultaneously and the Void Hunters emerged. Jake had to admit, they knew how to make an entrance. Each one was about 8 feet tall, covered in what looked like living shadow that shifted and writhed around a vaguely humanoid frame. Their eyes were points of cold blue light that seemed to absorb rather than reflect illumination. They moved with the fluid grace of creatures born to hunt in zero gravity, and every step they took seemed to drain a little warmth from the world. Jake murmured to himself. So that's why everyone was so worried. The lead hunter raised its head and spoke in a voice like cosmic wind through dead stars. We seek the young ones. Surrender them, and your death will be swift. Jake stepped out of cover, coffee mug still in hand, and gave them his best customer service smile. Sorry, guys. The cubs are under my protection. You're going to have to leave. The 3 hunters exchanged glances that somehow managed to be both alien and distinctly amused. You are human, the leader observed. A young species, you do not understand what we are. Sure I do, Jake replied, taking a sip of his coffee. You're space bullies who pick on kids. We had guys like you back on Earth, too. They usually didn't like it when someone picked back. The hunter on the right made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could freeze the air around it. We have consumed the fear of 1,000 worlds, little human. We have turned mighty warriors into gibbering prey. What could one soft creature from a backwater planet possibly do to... That was when Jake triggered the first trap. The sandbox erupted in a fountain of industrial adhesive and emergency foam that caught all 3 hunters in an expanding cloud of sticky, hardening polymer. The lead hunter snarled and began to phase through the foam. Apparently, living shadow had its advantages. Ah, Jake said conversationally. Good to know. Spike, activate the strobing lights. The preserve immediately turned into a disco from hell as every modified light fixture began flashing in patterns specifically designed to disorient creatures adapted to the steady darkness of space. The hunters stumbled, their shadowy forms flickering and destabilizing as their visual systems tried to cope with the assault. Now that's more like it, Jake grinned. Chompers, foam system. Emergency foam erupted from concealed dispensers throughout the compound, creating a maze of white barriers that broke up the hunters' sightlines and forced them to navigate by sound, which was exactly when Jake activated the weaponized food dispensers. The first volley of high-velocity nutrition pellets caught the lead hunter's center mass with the sound of a machine gun firing health food. The creature staggered, more surprised than hurt, and turned toward Jake's position with eyes that promised creative and prolonged death. "Interesting strategy, human," it hissed, shadow stuff beginning to coalesce around its hands into what were clearly weapons. "But you have merely delayed the inevitable. We are apex predators. You are prey." "See, that's where you're wrong," Jake replied, vaulting over his improvised command post and landing in the compound proper. "I'm not prey. I'm a human protecting kids, and that makes me something your species has never encountered before." The hunter lunged forward with inhuman speed, shadow claws extended to disembowel, and Jake did something that no creature in the galaxy had ever seen a human do in combat. He got angry. Properly, genuinely, biblically angry. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Jake's casual demeanor vanished, replaced by something cold and focused and absolutely merciless. He didn't dodge the hunter's attack so much as he stepped through it, catching the creature's wrist and using its own momentum to send it crashing into the modified playground equipment with enough force to dent reinforced metal. "Rule number 1, Jake said, his voice dropping to something that made the hunter's cosmic whispers sound cheerful. "Nobody threatens the kids." The second hunter tried to flank him, moving with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered resistance. Jake caught its movement in his peripheral vision, grabbed a loose piece of playground equipment, a reinforced swing that weighed about 50 pounds, and threw it with the accuracy of someone who had once thrown grenades for a living. The hunter caught the swing in the chest and discovered that shadow stuff, while excellent for psychological warfare, was not particularly effective against basic physics delivered with extreme prejudice. "Rule number 2, Jake continued, advancing on the third hunter, who was beginning to look like it was reconsidering its life choices. "When someone tells you to leave, you leave." The third hunter decided to demonstrate why void hunters were feared across the galaxy. It phased into full shadow form, becoming a writhing mass of darkness and hunger that surged toward Jake like a living nightmare. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be a standard-issue flashlight, except when he clicked it on, it wasn't a flashlight at all. "UV floodlight," Jake explained conversationally as the hunter's shadow form began smoking and writhing in apparent agony. "Turns out, creatures adapted to cosmic darkness really don't like concentrated ultraviolet radiation. Who knew?" The hunter rematerialized, screaming in frequencies that probably violated several laws of physics, and Jake discovered that void hunters, when forced back into physical form, were surprisingly fragile. 3 minutes later, it was over. The first hunter was unconscious, wrapped in so much emergency foam that it looked like a very angry, very dangerous burrito. The second was pinned under playground equipment and making sounds that suggested it was reconsidering its career choices. The third was curled up in a corner, whimpering at the memory of UV radiation, and wondering why no one had ever mentioned that humans carried portable stars in their pockets. "Well," Jake said, brushing foam off his jacket and retrieving his coffee mug, "that was educational." The cubs emerged from their hiding spots, staring at the 3 defeated void hunters with expressions of awe that would have been adorable if they weren't coming from baby apex predators. "Human Jake," Razorclaw whispered, "you just defeated the most feared predators in the galaxy." "With playground equipment," Chompers added, poking at the trapped hunter with scientific curiosity. "And snack dispensers," Spike concluded, his analytical mind clearly trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Jake shrugged and finished his coffee. "Kids, when you've been a Marine, everything else is just Tuesday. Now, who's hungry? I think we've got about 15 minutes before the cavalry arrives, and I promised you guys lunch." As sirens began wailing in the distance, and rescue ships appeared on the horizon, Jake looked around at his improvised fortress, 3 adoring alien cubs, and the galaxy's most feared predators, currently experiencing the indignity of being defeated by recycled playground equipment. "You know what?" he said to himself. "I think I like this job." The Galactic Defense Force arrived in full battle formation, which meant approximately 200 heavily armed ships, 3 battlecruisers, and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. They were prepared for a desperate rescue mission against the galaxy's most feared predators. What they found was Jake Morrison sitting on a park bench, sharing what appeared to be peanut butter sandwiches with 3 alien cubs, while 3 void hunters sat nearby in various states of defeat and existential crisis. Admiral Korath, a 7-foot-tall reptilian with more medals than seemed physically possible, was the first to disembark. He approached the scene with the cautious steps of someone who couldn't quite process what his sensors were telling him. "Human Morrison," he said slowly. "Our scanners indicate 3 void hunter signatures in this location. Are you having a picnic?" "Lunch break," Jake corrected. offering half a sandwich to Chompers, who examined it with the intense focus of a food scientist. The kids worked up an appetite during the excitement. Admiral Korath looked at the three Void Hunters. The first was still mostly wrapped in hardened foam, making muffled sounds that might have been threats or might have been requests for therapy. The second was sitting in what appeared to be a meditative pose, staring at nothing and occasionally whimpering. The third was curled up in a corner, flinching every time anyone turned on a light. "You defeated them?" the Admiral said, and it wasn't quite a question. "The Bai were bothering the kids," Jake replied, as if this explained everything, which from his perspective it probably did. Spike looked up from his sandwich, his crystalline features somehow managing to express profound confusion. "Admiral Korath, I have been analyzing the tactical data from our encounter, and I believe there may have been a fundamental miscalculation in our understanding of human capabilities." "How so?" "Well," Spike continued, his multiple eyes flickering as he accessed his memories, "according to all available data, Void Hunters are apex predators capable of defeating entire military squadrons. However, Human Jake defeated them using recreational equipment and snack dispensers." Razorclaw nodded enthusiastically, still wearing his improvised helmet armor. "It was amazing. He turned our playground into a fortress, and then he got this look in his eyes, and suddenly the scariest things in the galaxy were running away." "Well, not running exactly," Chompers added with scientific precision. "More like crawling and whimpering, but the effect was similar." Admiral Korath sat down heavily on what had been a decorative rock, but was now clearly part of an elaborate defensive position. "Human Morrison, do you understand what you've done?" Jake finished his sandwich and considered the question. "Protected 3 kids from bullies? You've single-handedly defeated the most feared predator species in known space, using playground equipment. And snacks," Jake added. "Don't forget the weaponized snacks." A new voice crackled over the communications system. "Flibberty still aboard the evacuation ship." Admiral, I think there might be something you should know about why we selected Human Morrison for this assignment." The Admiral's scales rippled in what Jake was learning meant either confusion or impending dread. "Explain." "Well, you see, we've been monitoring human military records since their species joined the galactic community, and we noticed some interesting patterns. Specifically, humans exhibit what their own military calls force multiplication when protecting non-combatants, particularly juveniles." "Force multiplication?" Nerissa's voice joined the conversation, still high with residual panic but tinged with something that might have been awe. "It means they become exponentially more dangerous when something threatens creatures they've decided to protect. We thought it was exaggeration in the reports, but—" She trailed off, looking at 3 Void Hunters who were clearly reconsidering every life choice that had led them to this moment. Jake stood up and brushed crumbs off his jacket. "Look, I don't know about force multiplication or any of that. All I know is that these 3 kids needed someone to watch out for them, and those guys," he gestured at the defeated hunters, "decided that wasn't going to happen. So I corrected their misunderstanding." "Corrected their misunderstanding," Admiral Korath repeated slowly. "With extreme prejudice," Spike added helpfully. One of the Void Hunters, the one who wasn't wrapped in foam or having a psychological breakdown, looked up at Jake with eyes that held something that might have been respect mixed with profound terror. "Human," it said in its cosmic whisper voice, "we have hunted across 1,000 worlds. We have faced warriors, soldiers, and apex predators from every corner of the galaxy, but we have never encountered anything like that." "Like what?" Jake asked. "A creature that becomes more dangerous the more it has to protect. Your species, you do not fight for territory or resources or dominance. You fight for others. This is—" The hunter paused, searching for words. "This is incomprehensible to us." Jake shrugged. "Seems pretty straightforward to me. Someone threatens kids, you stop them. Basic adulting." The hunter made a sound that might have been laughter, if it hadn't been so full of existential horror. "We will carry word of this encounter to all our kind. The humans are not prey. The humans are—" It struggled with the concept. "The humans are something else entirely." Admiral Korath stood up, his expression thoughtful. "Human Morrison, I think you should know that this incident is going to change how the galaxy views your species." "How so?" "Well, up until now, most civilizations saw humans as the friendly newcomers, adaptable, creative, but ultimately harmless. After today," the Admiral gestured at the scene around them, "after today, every predator species in the galaxy, is going to know that humans are the creatures who will turn playground equipment into weapons to protect cubs that aren't even their own species. Jake looked around at the preserve, taking in the makeshift fortress he'd built, the 3 cubs who were looking at him with expressions of pure hero worship, and the 3 void hunters who were clearly planning to find new careers in something less dangerous, like bomb disposal or volcano surfing. Good, he said finally. Maybe now bullies will think twice before picking on kids. Chompers looked up from where he'd been attempting to eat his sandwich wrapper. Human Jake, does this mean you're going to stay and be our guardian forever? Jake crouched down to the cub's eye level, his expression softening back into the easygoing security guard they'd first met. Well, buddy, I've got to admit, this is the most interesting job I've ever had, and the pay's pretty good. And someone's got to make sure you 3 don't accidentally eat anything important. Like the communication system? Spike asked innocently. Like the communication system, Jake confirmed, noticing that several pieces of electronic equipment now bore small bite marks. Razorclaw puffed out his chest with pride. We have the most dangerous guardian in the galaxy. Nah, Jake said, ruffling what passed for the cub's fur. I'm just a guy who takes his job seriously. The dangerous part only happens when someone threatens you kids. As rescue crews began cleaning up the aftermath and the Void Hunters were led away to what would probably be the galaxy's most uncomfortable debriefing session, Admiral Korath approached Jake one more time. Human Morrison, I have one more question. Shoot. How did you know the UV light would work against them? Jake grinned and pulled the modified flashlight from his jacket. I didn't, but I figured creatures called Void Hunters probably spent most of their time in dark places, and everything that lives in the dark hates bright lights, so I brought the brightest light I could find. You gambled? Admiral, I'm a human, guarding alien kids, with playground equipment against space monsters. At that point, everything's a gamble. The trick is making sure the odds are in your favor. As the last of the rescue ships departed, and the preserve settled back into peaceful quiet, Jake found himself once again sitting on a park bench with 3 alien cubs and a cup of coffee. The only difference was that somewhere in the galaxy, word was spreading about the species that would weaponize anything to protect the innocent. So, Jake said, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that didn't exist on Earth, anyone want to hear about the time I had to babysit my nephew for a weekend? Because let me tell you, that kid was way more dangerous than any Void Hunter. The cubs settled in eagerly for story time, and Jake Morrison, officially the galaxy's most overqualified babysitter, began to understand why some jobs were worth keeping, even if they did come with hazard pay.